All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's AmSECT Safety webinar titled Checking the Checklist, Too Little or Too Much? What's Best for Safety and Quality? We are fortunate today to have Captain Dylan Grandon from Louisville, Kentucky, who is going to be talking to us about that. He attended Georgetown College on an athletic baseball scholarship with a double master's in kinesiology and psychology, which he graduated in 2012 in. After graduation, he worked as a financial analyst for Humana. Maybe I should have left that out. And went on to attend officer school, candidate school in 2015, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the USMC in March of 2015. He attended numerous follow-on military schools and finished flight school to earn his naval aviator wings in May 2017. Captain Grandon is a chopper pilot and flies the CH-53E Super Stallion. He was stationed in Hawaii from 2017 to 2022 for 5 years, completed 3 deployments and numerous training exercises through the Pacific Theater, and is currently stationed at Marine Corps Air Station New River in Jacksonville, North Carolina as an instructor pilot, teaching the next generation of Marine aviators on the Super Stallion. He's engaged to Hannah, a captain in the United States Army who's a Judge Advocate General, or JAG, and attached to a third special who is attached to a 3rd Special Forces group at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. So we're going to have Billy Marks talk to us a little bit about the history of checklists, after which Captain Grandon is going to talk to us about checklists. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Just let me share my screen here real quick. All right. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. My name is Billy Marks, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of the history of the checklist. So let's begin. So what exactly is a checklist? I found a couple definitions online. First one is fairly specific. It's basically just a type of informational job aid used to reduce failure by compensating for potential limits of human memory and attention. More simply put, according to Merriam-Webster, it's also a list of things that could just be done. So I attached the AmSECT perfusion checklist just because I wanted to have this as a little bit of a visual aid. As you can see here, it's laid out very concise. It's all very obvious things that we do in our day-to-day just to make our lives a little bit easier and aid us as we are going through our cases. So as you can see here, we have a whole section for like cardioplegia, gas supply, our components, it goes on and on. And it's basically just there to be an aid for us. So that brings on the question of who uses a checklist. Well, really anybody can. A checklist has been used in multiple different fields. Aviation is probably the most notable one. Pilots are known to use checklists, and their crew are known to use checklists and protocols for essentially every part of their job. That's why we as clinicians brought that into our field, and it's helped us a lot as well. A few other notable ways that checklists are used within construction, people that construction engineers or use a form of checklist as basically they have deadlines and they'll set different sort of things to be met for days, weeks, months. That constitutes a form of a checklist. It can also be used at home. You have your daily grocery list. You may have a chores list for your kids. Even following a recipe, you're kind of checking off a checklist there if you think about it. And the options go on and on and on. So diving into the history, the first checklist has to deal with actually, aviation, believe it or not. The Boeing Model 299, also known as the B-17, the Flying Fortress, was a huge part of World War II for the Allied forces, specifically the United States of America. This was an unprecedented aircraft. It had just loads of cargo space. We could easily fly bombs over where we needed to drop them, more cargo across the ocean if we needed to. That's how it got its name, the Flying Fortress. Unfortunately, in 1935, when the Boeing Model 299 was being test flown by one of the chief testing pilots in the Air Corps, it crashed. It was eventually chalked up to pilot error, but most of the pilots didn't really believe that since it was their chief flight tester. They kind of came together and discussed it. And when the US military bought a few of the Model 299s to be used as test aircraft, they kind of decided, hey, we should just take a list of the most obvious things of our job. And, basically we can just put that out of our minds. We have it just written down in front of us, little note card, no bigger, no more concise than that. And we'll just use that for takeoffs, landing, and taxiing. It ended up being wildly successful for them. They never had another issue flying a Model 299 again. The US military ended up buying thousands of these planes and, won World War II as a result. So, yeah, that was pretty much the first checklist recorded in history as far as we know. So moving on to medicine, obviously the checklist kind of exploded within aviation, both commercially and with the military. And there wasn't really many recorded uses of the checklist in medicine up until 2001. We have Dr. Peter Pronovost. He created a checklist to be used for central line insertion. Basically, the whole goal was to prevent bloodstream infections. So I listed off right here. We have all the steps. They're the most basic steps that you should follow as a clinician inserting a central line. And basically they had this list, they handed it to a nurse and they said, hey, administration has your back if you need it. You can hard stop a doctor anytime if any of these steps are missed. It kind of represented a huge shift in culture for medicine, just because it was a very new thing where nurses were allowed to hard stop a doctor and say, hey, you're not doing this right. Let's, come back and do it again. It was so successful that actually in 2003, the Michigan Health and Hospital Association approached Dr. Pronovost about employing his checklist throughout the ICUs in Michigan. And this 3-year study or 18-month study, showed a massive reduction in bloodstream infections. While it wasn't necessarily, like I said, the first way that checklist was used in medicine to help prevent or help promote patient safety, it was regarded as the most successful one to date. So the years go down, surgery explodes in the 21st century, and the World Health Organization decides to get involved. They say, we're doing a lot of surgery worldwide. We need to have a standardized safety protocol. So they launched the Safe Surgery Saves Lives initiative in 2009. With that came the WHO Surgical Safety Checklist. So when this was introduced and put throughout 8 different hospitals in 8 countries for a study, they were actually shown to reduce complications from 11% to 7%. The mortality dropped from 1.5% to 0.8%. These were huge numbers. They were absolutely baffled when the study came back and showed that this was such a huge reduction. They immediately started promoting it to be used worldwide. And that's where we had so many checklists come from today. So I just put the surgical safety checklist. This is the original one released in January 2009. As you can see, it's a very general checklist. We just have before induction anesthesia, we have before skin incision, before the patient leaves the operating room. What was so nice about this checklist was it's just a very concise thing for clinicians to have, and they were able to tweak it to meet the needs of their departments. General surgery is not going to have the same checklist necessarily as a cardiac surgery or an orthopedic surgery. And we could go on and on about that. The last slide I just wanted to share with you guys, I felt was appropriate due to our presenter being a pilot, was the miracle on the Hudson River. This was a huge story where a checklist really came in handy and saved a lot of lives. January 14th, 2009, actually the day after the surgical safety checklist was released by the WHO, US Airways Flight 1529 was struck by a flock of Canadian geese, leading to engine failure. The two captains on board, Captain Sullenberger and Skiles, quickly were able to diagnose the issue, communicate throughout the methods that need to be communicated, talk to their cabin crew, and respond thanks to the use of their engine failure checklist. During their communication with the cabin crew, they decided a ditching procedure into the Hudson River would be the most appropriate, and they allowed the cabin crew time to work through their own emergency protocols and checklists in the meantime. Many lives were saved, and this was seen as a huge success for checklists and safety overall. So thanks for listening to my brief history. I attached some citations for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
I think it's your turn now, Dylan. You're up.
Okay. Rana, if you could open my slides, please. Billy, thank you very much. Great introduction. One thing I have for Brett, I do not have a double master's. I just have double major. I am just a lowly or aviator. No double masters for me, just a double major from Georgetown. But
hey, you should have taken that.
You out here and having this conversation. My mom and dad are both in the medical field. They are physician assistants. They do open heart surgery. We've had multiple conversations throughout my career about checklists and how they utilize it in their lives and how I utilize it in mine. And ultimately, I think it's a good thing. So we'll just get started. This is crew resource management. When I was at my fleet squadron in Hawaii, I had the opportunity to be a crew resource management facilitator. So every year, just the same way medical professionals have to recertify their profession, and you have to prove that you are still worthy of holding the title that you do. Aviators also have to do that, and that we have to do that once per year. That includes a check ride, a flight. It includes 2 tests, and it includes this class that I'm going to give today. But this is a thing that I feel strongly about, and I'm very happy to be here. So please, next slide, Rona. All right, just a little bit of background about me. Thanks, Brad, for starting it off. But I joined the Marine Corps in January 2015. I was in flight school from October of 2015 until June of 2017. From that time, I spent the majority of my fleet career in Hawaii. I did almost 5 years out there. I did 3 deployments with HMH 463 out to Okinawa, and then we got on ships. I was on 3 different ships throughout the Pacific Theater, the USS Wasp, the USS Green Bay, and the USS America. Thoroughly enjoyed my time in Hawaii, professionally and personally. It's also where I met my fiance, and now we are both stationed back in North Carolina. So I'm happy to be where I am, and enjoyed my time through the fleet. Gained a couple of different cool qualifications, one including the crew resource management facilitator, and then also the assistant NATOPS instructor, which is a standardization instructor. So crew resource management itself is a standardization tool. And then I also was able to pick up a standardization tool for the aircraft, so ground side and flight side, while I was in Hawaii. That is a big deal for me as an aviator, and I'd like to carry that on once I finish my military career and hopefully into the commercial aviation career as well. So next slide, please. All right, this is what we're going to discuss this evening. We'll just talk about the background of CRM, so crew resource management, how it came to be, where it came from, and where it's going to go in the future. We'll discuss how I use it in my day-to-day life as an aviator, just on the ground, but also in flight as well. We'll talk about some of the changes, how it has evolved throughout the years. Started in the 70s, how it's evolved through the 90s, how it's evolved in the 2000s, and then going forward, how it's going to look with automation, where aircraft are getting smarter. AI is now being involved in military aviation and aviation in general. So how crew resource management is going to look in the future. Next slide. All right, so just a background. So this was originally constructed by a NASA psychologist back in the 70s. It came to be because of a pretty catastrophic aircraft mishap at Tenerife. This happened in 1977. Two large Boeing aircraft collided on a taxiway. They both pulled out onto the runway in opposite directions, and both were trying to take off. And they had a head-to-head collision. 583 people tragically were killed. So at that point, they decided that something needed to come of that mishap, and a new program needed to be installed. Later that year, so that's the National Transportation Safety Board got involved in the United States, and we started creating what was called crew resource management. The NASA psychologist, he had started it with cockpit resource management. However, with it being a crew function, it's not just a tool that's utilized in the cockpit, but like Billy was talking about, it is utilized throughout the entire crew. So in my crews, I have 2 pilots that sit in the cockpit, but I could have 2 crew chiefs or 3 crew chiefs or more in the back that have just as equal and just as important jobs. So that's why it has evolved into crew resource management and not just in the cockpit. But the U.S. did formally introduce this program in 1978. Unfortunately, there was another mishap. All these things happen because of catastrophes, but that's how we learn and create a safer future. But just outside of Portland, another United aircraft was flying, and they had a blinking light in their cockpit. So they got sucked into this small blinking light. Both pilots were flying the aircraft. The aircraft was 100% safe. It was flyable aircraft. They were talking to ATC. They were talking to Portland. They just needed to continue to orbit to troubleshoot this problem. They actually brought their flight attendants up to the cockpit as well to help them. But they could not figure out why this light was going off. It was attached to their landing gear. However, their landing gear was working. It just, this light was associated with that landing gear, and it was blinking, and it caused everybody to get sucked down into their control panel. They continued to troubleshoot all the way until they ran out of fuel, and unfortunately they crashed, and a lot of people did pass away in this mishap as well. So a perfectly flyable jet, perfectly capable air crew got sucked into one small little blinking light, and they lost track of what their mission was and what they were trying to do, and ultimately it resulted in the loss of life. So that was in 1978. The U.S. started pushing forward with this crew resource management, and it was accepted by all major airlines in the 70s, and then across the globe was widely accepted in the 1990s. The U.S. military and Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps started picking up the crew resource management in the late 1990s. And since then, all military aviators use standardized checklists for all parts of aviation, whether it be when we're briefing our flight on deck, all the way through we shut down the plane at the end of the day. And there are checklists for every single portion of our flight. Our checklists look very similar to what Billy was just showing. They're step by step, and they are numbered. You go one through whatever it is, and it's based on what phase of flight you're in. So engine startup, whether you're going to taxi, we have takeoff checklist. Once we level off, we have cruise checklists. Based on what our mission for the day is, we have different checklists prior to executing particular missions. And then we have instrument checklists, we have landing checklists, and then we have our shutdown checklist as well. And they are all call and response. So one pilot will read off the checklist, the other pilot will execute the task and have a verbal acknowledgement as well, so that everybody recognizes that we're working through this together, and we go step by step from top to bottom. Does it get monotonous? It absolutely does. However, it is emphasized that crew are not to memorize checklists. However, I can tell you through the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours I have on this aircraft, I can tell you what most steps in these checklists are. However, it's preached to us the discipline to start with these checklists top to bottom. You are not to memorize them, because once you feel like you memorize these checklists, you start to get complacent, And when you get complacent, you start to miss steps. And once you start missing steps, that's when you can get into an unsafe regime of flight or unsafe scenario, and that's when tragedy can occur. So we do not memorize checklists, and we do them every single day, no matter what. If it's hot, if it's cold, if you're tired, if you're hungry, you feel all the different same emotions that everybody in the operating room feels. We have very long days. We fly in crazy temperatures. We fly all hours of the day and night. It's the same way you guys are working. So we feel the same things that you guys feel while you're standing on your feet for hours and hours and hours. But it's that discipline that you have to have to accomplish the mission and to keep everyone safe at the end of the day. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more, just talking about we interact as a crew. So there may be days that we're flying with very junior crew chiefs. They could be 18, 19, 20 years old. I'm 33. My boss is in his 40s, right? So I've got 10 years of experience. He's got 20 years of experience. We might be flying with somebody who has 1 year of experience. However, this is a team function, and we are operating as a crew, and everybody's voice is equal to everyone else's. And we all have a say. So when something comes up and we have a conversation, there is no difference between the young E3 Lance Corporal and the old school 05 Lieutenant Colonel who's been in for 20 years. That rank gradient goes away in the cabin, and everybody who has a concern is able to voice that and is able to talk about what they're feeling. And then we all get on the same page and move forward as a team. It can be difficult at times, but that's what it takes to operate safely and efficiently, especially in a dynamic environment that a lot of our flights end up being. Another thing Billy was talking about with the pilot error, unfortunately, a very high percentage of aviation mishaps can be boiled down to pilot error. Or human error, really, not just pilot error, but human error. So what that looks like is maybe the pilot misdiagnoses an emergency and performs the wrong steps, or performs the steps out of order. Maybe they are not executing the steps at the right time, or it could be a mechanical failure, right? There could be issues with something that happened on the maintenance side. One of our maintenance Marines did something wrong that a pilot wasn't even a part of the conversation. However, a human did not utilize their checklist when performing their maintenance, because our maintainers utilize big, giant textbooks of checklists for every step that they do as well. Maybe they didn't utilize their checklist and they forgot a step and they missed a bolt somewhere, and some control unit rattled loose, and that could end up in a catastrophe really quick. However, that shouldn't happen. That's why everybody uses our checklist top to bottom every single day, and it's emphasized from the military, Marine Corps level, how important these things can be, because people's lives are on the line every single day. The maintainers, they don't fly in the aircraft. I, as a pilot, am trusting that the young Marines are doing their job correctly, and I trust it with my life every single day when I go fly. And I know that they're young professionals, and they're doing their best, and they're doing their job to the best of their ability, and that's why our job is so successful. But continue on. Just we work as a team. Just on the right side of the page, we work as a team, and everything gets accomplished safely and efficiently to accomplish our mission. And ultimately that mission is to bring personnel, equipment, aircraft, everybody back home safely. Next slide, please. So CRM for us is broken down into 7 critical skills. We'll talk about these and then how they incorporate into our checklist, and why these are important. Some of these I'll go a little bit quicker, but as a Marine aviator, we utilize acronyms for just about everything. So the way I memorize my 7 critical skills of CRM, that is DAM class. All right. So decision-making assertiveness, mission analysis, communication leadership, adaptability, flexibility, and situational awareness. So now we'll just go into these and how I utilize these on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please. Decision-making. it's the ability to use logical, sound judgment in a real world, in a real-time situation. Sometimes those decisions have to be made in a split second. Sometimes those decisions can be made long-term. However, they are based, those decisions are made off of sound judgment and because of our skills in the cockpit. We get those skills from training, and all of that training comes from years and years and years and prior history of people who have done it the wrong way, and we learn it and how to do it in the future. Decisions come from, like, when I am executing an emergency in the aircraft, I'm not doing that just straight from memory. I do have memory items, but the non-flying pilot will break out our checklist. Our crew chiefs have their own checklists in the back. So then they will pull out their checklist. Everybody looks at the same EP. They have nice little tabs on the side of them. It tells you exactly what the emergency is. Everybody's on the same page. We flip to that and we start working top to bottom, and we're doing the same things at the same time in order to fight that mishap together, just like what Billy's talking about with that the miracle on the Hudson. They all figured out what the problem was. They worked through the EP and they got everybody into that water, made that belly landing, saved a lot of lives that day. Next slide, please. Assertiveness was what we're talking about with that rank gradient. So sometimes you have a young co-pilot who is sitting next to me or sitting next to whoever, and you got an old school guy who thinks he knows everything that the aircraft can throw at him, and maybe he has misdiagnosed an error in the aircraft, and it's up to someone else in the crew to say, "I'm sorry, sir. I think you got it wrong, and I think this is why." So assertiveness is stating, like, you're speaking up if you think something's wrong, but you're speaking up with like factual based information as well. So we can look at an engine and figure out why this engine is malfunctioning and say, "Sir, I think you're going to execute the wrong EP." And if you do that, we could end up in a bad scenario. This is why I think you're going down the wrong path. This is why I think I'm right. And then obviously you come to a decision as a crew and you move forward from there. But you flip to your checklist. Our checklists all tell us what the engine failure is. We've got multiple different types of engine failures mechanically. And then we can see the symptoms based on our temperatures, based on our pressures, based on vibrations on the aircraft. And all that is in your top of your checklist. You move down with the certain steps and you execute the critical action memory items in order to effectively land the aircraft. But that doesn't happen unless somebody speaks up for themselves or speaks up for the crew. Next slide, please. Mission analysis. So this happens on a short-term or a long-term level. So we have three different types of mission planning or mission analysis. We have time critical. So time critical happens in the cockpit. So I'm making split-second decisions based on what I'm seeing around me in real time. Then I have deliberate, which happens just prior to takeoff. So all my pre-flight planning, maybe the day prior or the morning of a flight or the night of a flight, I'm doing my deliberate planning so that I can plan the next 6 hours for my mission. And then we'll also have in-depth mission planning or in-depth mission analysis. And that's like if I'm planning a long-term mission that's a week from now, or if it's a month from now, or if I'm doing a deployment. So if I'm going to plan something that's 6 months from now, that is our in-depth mission analysis. That's where you just plan long-term planning for mission success. Next slide, please. Communication. This is one of the most important factors for us as aviators. So we obviously have to be very clear. We have to be concise. We use very standardized terminology in the cockpit. The way we say things, our cadence, the actual verbiage that we're using. We use brevity codes for a lot of what we say so that I can make a 10-word sentence and I can say it in about 3 words. So it's a lot shorter. It's to the point. It's succinct. Everybody knows what I'm saying and where I'm directing the aircraft to go. There's call and response. So when I say something, I expect to hear a very specific response, either from my co-pilot or from my crew chief in the back. And then they expect to hear very specific terminology from me as well. all of that comes from checklists, and it comes from just our training in our our flight school platforms as well. But communication is huge, and making sure everybody's on the same page at the same time throughout the regime of flight, because things can change very quickly for us. So the brevity codes are huge, and the standardized terminology. Everything we do in military aviation, specifically the United States Marine Corps, is standardized, and it gets done to a specific way. And it just goes back to that discipline where everything gets done the right way every single time. Next slide, please. Leadership. As the aircraft commander, I am the leader of that crew. Ultimately, I signed for this $55 million aircraft when I go fly it, and I'm responsible for the aircraft. I'm responsible for all the systems on top of it. I'm responsible for my crew. And if I have Marines in the back, inside of our helicopter, we can fit 30 fully loaded combat troops. So I may be responsible for anywhere between $55 million in an aircraft, but also 35 Marines and their lives, right? So as the leader of that team, it is very important that I know what I'm doing, and I'm confident in my abilities to do that, and that my crew is also confident in my abilities. And we do that by just our in-depth training day to day. But the competency comes with time. Leadership is huge in the Marine Corps. As always, being a good leader, a good communicator, a good listener, and able to portray what you're trying to convey, what you're trying to say clearly and concisely matters to your crew. Next slide, please. Adaptability, flexibility. Our missions change constantly. We have to be ready to take a radio call. Most of our flights are usually about 6 hours. So I could be 2 hours into a flight and trying to execute one certain mission. I get a radio call from higher headquarters, and I have to just adjust immediately, get the crew in our current crew mindset, shift that, get everybody on board to go do something else, figure out where I'm going, how to get there, and then execute that mission safely, efficiently, and expeditiously. Really, that's the biggest portion of our job, getting it done quickly and getting it done safely. Next slide, please. Situational awareness is big for us, just because flying daytime, nighttime is in the three-dimensional world. Things are changing very quickly. Radios, I have 3 different radios in my aircraft that can each listen to 4 different frequencies. So I could have 12 different radios going off inside of my brain at all times. I've got 3 different people trying to talk to me. I'm trying to fly an aircraft with both my feet, both my hands. I'm looking around. Not to mention it's at night, and I'm flying with night vision goggles on, and there are potentially bad guys around you. So having a high SA and knowing where you are in time and space at all times and where you're trying to go next is a big skill in order to enhance crew resource management, making sure that everybody knows where you are, where they are, and where the crew is, and where the crew is going next. Make sure that everybody stays safe. But next slide, please. Talk about CRM skill degraders. So this is just as important as doing our job correctly, is knowing how and why we might fail at our job, or why we might slack at our job a little bit. So complacency is the biggest thing. And the Marine Corps has a saying that says complacency kills. As soon as you start getting complacent in your job and you think you know it all, and you feel like you can go out and do it with your eyes closed, that's when something's going to pop up. All right. So making sure you're staying on top of your game, making sure you're studying all the time, making sure you're reading your checklist top to bottom. So we talked about it at the beginning. I know how to run. I can start up my aircraft without a checklist. I never will, because the day that I have decided that I don't need a checklist is the day I'm going to miss a step. And that's the day that I'm going to cause a mishap, and that is going to be back on me. And I can live with that. I may not be able to live with it, but I wouldn't be able to live with it even if I was able. But complacency is a dangerous trait in anybody, let alone in fields such as the military or in surgery as well. One at the bottom, the arrogance is also a big one. You got some people who have done this for a very long time. They feel like they've seen it all. They feel like they know it all. And that's someone who is dangerous to fly with. And I would imagine that is probably someone who is dangerous to do surgery with. There's a difference between arrogance and confidence, right? So confidence is like quiet confidence is something that I very much believe in and very much the Marine Corps teaches. We're taught the basic building blocks and we build on top of those for hours and hours and hours and years and years and years doing our job. So we all are very confident in our ability to fly the plane or execute certain missions. However, we're not going to be arrogant to the point where we don't need to pay attention to what's going on around us or pay attention to the rules and regulations on which we fly. Rate and gradient we talked about. So everybody in the cockpit has an equal say. If the flying pilot has decided he doesn't need to listen to that junior Marine in the back, maybe that person in the back can see something or can hear something or feel something that nobody else can, and they're trying to let the rest of the crew know. At no point should anybody be shushed or should anybody be shut down based on rank. That just won't happen in a military or in a Marine Corps cockpit. It won't happen. So it can happen. You hear stories about things happening like that, but it just doesn't happen very often. And I've never seen it in my career. Distractions are a big one for us. So like I said earlier, I've got the radios blasting in my ear. I'm trying to fly a plane. My current job right now is an instructor pilot. I'm flying with somebody who's never flown a big giant helicopter like I currently fly. So when I'm working through a checklist, it's on my knee board, sitting on my knee. I'm also looking out, trying to fly. I can get distracted. I can have to listen to a radio call or somebody in the back calls for me for my attention, and I get pulled away from a checklist. Having a crew that will push you back onto your checklist is a skill that everyone needs to have, and that is that's the crew resource management part of our job. If I get distracted, someone else is going to push me back to do what I was previously doing in order to accomplish our mission. Interruptions, same thing. So if somebody calls me away or a radio goes off, or if it's too hot or too cold, or it's been a long day, like if you get extended, if you're flying 6 hours and you get extended, you're just getting tired, fatigued. Having the discipline to just rely on your basic building blocks and going back to your checklist is what's going to save lives and what's going to accomplish missions for us. It's really, I don't want to say it's that easy, but because our job is not easy. However, there have been years and years and years of training, years and years of studies. They try to break it down to the lowest level really for us. They put it on paper so that when you're stressed or when something's going wrong, you don't have to try to pull something out of your memory. It's already on your knee. You just look down and you read a checklist, and that's how you can get through a situation that is less than ideal in front of you. Next slide, please. And this is what we're going to talk about going into the future. So we talked about aircraft and pilots, and we have drones in the military who are either flown by pilots thousands and thousands of miles away. We also have autonomous aircraft that can just be dialed in on GPS, and you give them a coordinate to fly to or multiple coordinates to fly to, and they can fly specific headings, altitudes, airspeeds just by dialed in. Same with systems on aircraft and maintenance. There are certain systems in the aircraft that don't require pilot assistance. Like they just work on their own. And they don't, like, those checklists are built into their software. Same with the maintenance. There are very smart aircraft out now. You can see some of the 5th generation jets that are flying around. And they are very smart to the point that the maintenance gets done on those aircraft while they're flying. Like if a part fails or if a part is nearing its life cycle, the aircraft is able to order its own parts and able to, so that when you get on deck, you have parts waiting for it and maintainers waiting to assemble new parts and pieces onto that aircraft. I don't know of any automated maintenance by like maintainers. I don't think that's actually happening. No robots or anything are doing maintenance on jets. or for helicopters for us. That goes back to just young Marines and mechanics who know what's broken on an aircraft. They break out their checklist and they find the right tools and the right parts, something I would never be able to do, but they get it done and get the aircraft back up and flying the next day. But that's basically what I have. We can go to the next slide. That's just my question slide, but that's all I have as far as CRM, crew resource management. It really is a team function from top to bottom. Everybody is just as important as the next person. That gets preached from day one. The guys in the back are just as important as the guys in the front. If I'm having a bad day, I can be just as dangerous as somebody who's not paying attention in the back, right? So it can be tough at times. However, that's why we fly as a crew. I don't have to have my game every single day, my A game every single day. I can rely on the team to help out. Thanks. I'm open for questions now.
Rana, are we taking questions now or at the end?
We can hold out for questions at the end, but if anyone has any questions, just feel free to enter them in the chat.
Just a brief summary here. Thank you, Captain Grandon. That was a lot of interesting information there, and I will remember DAM class for quite a while.
Yes, sir.
It's going to stick in my head. So I was asked to just do a brief summary here at the end of our presentation before the Q&A about the AmSECT Safety Committee. What is a safety committee and what kind of work do we do? The AmSECT Safety Committee has a lot of directives from the board, and we generally just produce safety-related content for AmSECT members. The AmSECT Safety Committee helped create the Pillar Award for Excellence that was instituted, I think, about 2 years ago. Several years back, we also created the I Pass the Clamp Off handoff tool, which covers a lot of the similar information that Captain Grandon was talking about. I gave you an unsolicited promotion there, Captain Grandon. Every year, we have been sponsoring a student essay contest where students write in and outline different components of safety or near-miss events that they've seen, and then how they learn from that and what they think about going forward. What are the opportunities for us in perfusion? I saw Gary Grist is on this call. Perfusion, I don't remember, Gary, which award you won, but it was maybe a Lifetime Achievement Award last year at AmSECT. Gary was instrumental in creating our FMEA archives, which are a vast collection of failure mode effects analysis. And these are useful for a variety of things, Joint Commission accreditation, but also prospective considerations around different events that could happen. Additionally, we have and will continue to work on clinical protocols for a variety of unique situations. And we have more work underway. This webinar is one of our newest projects. We are working on an algorithm for oxygenator failure. There was just a letter to the editor in the latest issue of JECT about oxygenator failures. And we're also working on updated alerts and notification processes so that the AmSECT membership can watch out for recalls and other equipment related events that will be applicable to them. So some of the things we talked about today, just to summarize, and again, we're going to open this up for Q&A in just a second. Checklists have been endorsed in healthcare for a long time, and specifically in extracorporeal circulation for many years. We heard how they're crucial to risk management. They can aid in early identification and mitigation of important items. We didn't talk too much about, but we did hear a little bit regarding communication and different types of checklists. Some might be more applicable than others to different scenarios. Maybe we can talk more about that in the Q&A. Sometimes we're concerned maybe that fluff content decreases safety. And as Captain Grandon outlined, there are multiple checklists in aviation, and as well, the AmSECT standards and guidelines require a use of a checklist at multiple time points in a procedure. That's a standard, not a guideline. Both the AmSECT standards and guidelines and the AmSECT example checklists are independent. They're not exactly identical, but using both of those can help to create a more comprehensive review for yourself so that you can create the appropriate checklist for your facility going forward. The AmSECT Standards and Guidelines example checklist is in the appendix, and the other example checklist is available at this link here, which I think is the one that Billy had in his presentation. So with that being said, I am going to transition out and allow our moderator or moderators to start the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. I have a question, Dylan. If you had standardized checklists on one of your slides, could you elaborate a little bit about what you meant by a standardized checklist?
Yeah, so our standardized checklists are printed by our overarching hierarchy, and like our obviously the big Marine Corps and big Navy print those, and they come standard, like they come to us on pieces of paper. We do not alter them or change them. Every single CH-53 pilot does the exact same checklist on every single flight. So I could theoretically go fly with any other squadron and be able to fly the aircraft the exact same way every single time, because everybody flies it the exact same way. We all do the checklists in the same order. We do them at the same times in flight. We say the exact same things. Like I talked about standard terminology and brevity codes, we all say the exact same thing. And that's just that interoperability. So that if we need to, or if we're ever placed in a situation where we have to do this with outside of our normal squadron, it's a seamless transition. The standardized terminology and standardized checklists go to all CH-53 communities, and we actually call it our Denny's checklist. It's just like a big Denny's menu. It's like laminated. We fold it up, put it on our knee board, and we can utilize each specific checklist based on our regime of flight.
Thank you.
Sir.
Captain Grandon, I've got a quick question.
Yes.
And everything was just great. The presentations were awesome. You had you mentioned how in the military they discourage people from memorizing checklists, that you're given direction not to memorize checklists. But I think after years, the more the time in that you have, the more experience you have, the harder it is, because you get exposed to the same checklist over and over and over, to prevent yourself from doing exactly that. You had mentioned that you know the content of the checklist, but you try not to just do it by memory. Is there tips or tricks that you guys practice to avoid just doing something kind of, without thinking it through, or by memory when you're going through your checklist?
Yes. So absolutely. They discourage it. We do not memorize checklists. Like that's a day, like they tell you day one, you're going to do checklists every day of your life from now on until you get out of the Marine Corps. However, you're not going to memorize those. I've been flying this plane for a very long time. I can tell you, I could work through those checklists right now without looking at them. However, like I said, like the day that I decide that I'm not going to look at my checklist is probably the day that I'm going to miss a step, and which could result in something very bad happening. So the fact that, like, I think it's a humility thing. Like you're being humble. You're humbling yourself to where you are not bigger than the aircraft. You're not bigger than the mission. I'm going to look at my checklist every single time, because that's the way I was taught. I was taught the right way to do something. And I'm going to have the discipline to look at it every single time and make sure I'm checking the box. I'm hitting the wickets every single time, because if I don't, something bad could happen. And it is a could, right? Like it's not guaranteed that something bad is going to happen just because I miss a step on a checklist, but the possibility that it could happen is all that it needs to be for me. Like I'm not willing to accept that risk. I'm not willing to take that risk, and possibly injure, like lose an aircraft or hurt people that are inside of my aircraft. So I'm going to do everything I can. And if it's taken 10 extra seconds or taken 2 extra minutes to pull out my checklist and read through it and make sure I'd hit every step, I'm going to do that every single time.
And it's kind of reminding yourself of the outcome of what happens when you don't do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
we get our flight briefs every day, and at the end of every flight brief, we talk about a mishap as a crew, and we talk about why the mishaps happen. So it's a very humbling experience. Before you go fly an aircraft, we talk about a mishap and why a crash occurred. And like I said, it's very high. It's like 95+% of the time it's human error. And I'm not willing to be one of those statistics. So I'm going to do what I can do in order to minimize that.
I got a couple of questions from the chat boxes. The question one is, how do you avoid memorization? Any tips to not just go through?
Yeah, so that's what we just talked about. It's just the discipline that you have. Like the way we learn our job is that we are not going to do memorization. So just falling back on what we were taught from day one, and not being bigger than the job, and just trusting the way you're taught, just to not memorize and check all the boxes each and every day. That's how I do it. I'm not willing to accept extra risk or to put anybody's lives at risk that don't need to be. So I will take the extra time to read my checklist every day.
And the second question is there any input on how much is too much or what's enough for a checklist? How to make sure you hit all the points but not take an excessive amount of time? I think this question is referring to checklist fatigue.
Yep.
And how do you avoid that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think that comes through trial and error. I feel like before a product gets pushed out, it needs to be vetted by high-ranking people or people that are well respected in the community, and they can tell you whether yes, this needs to be in there, or yes, it does not need to be in there. The way our checklists work is it's step by step on how to turn an engine on. It's step by step. But it's not extraneous, right? So it doesn't tell me like the inner workings of the engine, but it tells me all the buttons I need to push, all the levers I need to pull or move in order to turn that on. But that was vetted through hundreds and thousands of scientists, 100,000 engineers throughout multiple years of time in order to get that checklist published. So I think checklist fatigue can be a thing if you've got too much stuff on there that may not necessarily add like positive information. However, I am a huge proponent of checklists, and I think that we should use them. However, I fully understand what checklist fatigue is, and from reading the background of this class or this seminar, and I got online and I just Googled like checklist fatigue. I can see how it can be a thing. It doesn't necessarily apply to my job, but I understand if you're dealing with too much information, how it could be a thing. Yes, sir.
There's another question which I'm not sure it pertains to checklists. How do you suggest standardizing language among different surgeons? Scott or Mike, you can correct me. I don't think this pertains to checklists, since standardizing language amongst different surgeons, I don't think does it have something to do with checklists, do you think?
Well, I think that's something that Captain Grandon covered. They use standardized language in the cockpit, and I think that there have been some papers in the safety literature regarding surgery and using standardized terms. It's not something we've approached specifically at AmSECT, at least not to my knowledge, but someone else could certainly jump in. It's probably a good idea, but where does it fall on the priority list is a good question. And who's going to enforce those standardizing communication in various ORs throughout the country?
I'd also throw out there too I was when as we were talking about that, what I was thinking about. I mean, there's benefits of standardized language, not making mistakes, but I was also hearing Captain Grandon talking about the time that's saved by shortening things down to very short phrases, so I don't, because I ramble. so you don't spend 10 minutes describing a problem that's something very short, or like that accident that you described where they got so focused in on what they were looking at that they lost the forest for the trees, ran out of fuel, and crashed. But the time that you save, I was thinking about the time management, because the time that you save in standardized communication, I would think is minimal. But the flip side, where my mind was going with this is, at what point do we have do we use up too much time with our checklist? Is there a point where that becomes too overburdensome? And I know our experience where I work at is with the double checklists. We've tried to utilize that, where you don't just have one person doing the checklist, but you have somebody over their back checking it with them. But it requires so much time to do that, and staff also, that it's at a point it becomes unmanageable.
I think you
Captain
just answered
Grandon,
the question, Scott.
Yeah, I'd like to pipe in. I'm sorry to interrupt anyone who's typed in something. Do you guys have, one of the questions that we see here in our chat box is, dual confirmation of a checklist item. Do you have anything in your processes that can only be done once? For example, some things, when we're preparing equipment, we can only do it once. You can't undo it and then redo it. How do you, if you have anything like that, how do you handle those? Are you there? Am I there?
Mike, are you asking Dylan about it?
Yes. Well, anyone really, but yes.
I'm sorry. I think I heard my name, but I might not have missed the whole question. Sorry.
That's okay. Do you do dual confirmation of all or some checklist items?
Okay. We do. We have dual confirmation, or dual concurrence is what we call it, really. So when we are trying to move specific parts or pieces of the aircraft, so if I'm going to work on an engine, or because I have 3 engines on my aircraft, so if I'm going to move our speed control lever, or if I'm doing anything with fuel or switches, anything where I'm moving things in the aircraft, I will touch it myself, and then someone in the crew will look at it, concur with me. They will say dual concurrence, and then I will move it to where it needs to go, just so I'm not like trying to adjust my number 2 engine and I grab my number 1 engine, and if I'm trying to like shut off, and I've shut off the number 1 engine when really my number 2 engine was the bad one. So we do what's called dual concurrence. We don't have someone that necessarily looks over our shoulder. It is just a quick glance and says, yes, you are doing the right thing. Continue with what you're doing.
There's a question about workplace fatigue. The question is, with life-work balance and safety in mind, how many hours is considered safe to fly, and at what point is it unsafe?
Okay, that's a good question. Every group is slightly different. So for us, when I was in my fleet squadron, we flew 6 hours at a time. However, our crew day, what was listed as like my hours to work, were limited to 10 hours per day. So I could be on that aircraft for 10 hours, but I couldn't fly more than 6. If I went more than 6, I would need some higher echelon to approve that mission. And if I worked for more than 10 hours at a time, I could be extended up to 12 by my commanding officer. And if I needed to work longer than 12 hours, that would need approval from the next higher echelon. So the next commanding officer above my CO. So most flights were limited to 6. However, they could be extended with the appropriate approval level based on someone's rank and experience. But 6 is like the general fleet-wide like limit. We don't really fly more than 6 at a time unless it's a pretty big mission.
There was an anonymous question about practice of emergency procedures. Captain Grandon, how often do you practice emergency procedures?
Every single day. We get random quizzes and tests and things like that we have to complete. When we do our flight brief, it's basically a big giant checklist, and it starts with I am me, you are you, we are in this aircraft, we're going to go fly this mission, we're going to fly from checkpoint A to checkpoint B at this altitude and airspeed, and all the way through the entire mission. And then once we finish the conduct of flight, we go and we talk through emergency procedures. And then even though I've done this 10,000 times, I go through every emergency procedure that we have in our aircraft. And then we talk through all the EPs and what we're going to do based on where we are in that flight and where we are in time and space, geographically, all of that, how we're going to attack that EP as a team, and how we're going to land the aircraft, whether it be a land as soon as practical, we have a land as soon as possible criteria, and then we have a land immediately criteria. So all of those things go into our flight brief before we even walk to the aircraft. So we talk about emergency procedures every single day.
Rona, are we scheduled for 1 hour?
Yes, we are. We could probably do one more question if there's one out there.
There was one more question, but it was really more of a suggestion. Yeah, a couple of suggestions there.
So Dylan, would you suggest to us as perfusionists in the operating room to standardize our checklists based on our educational organization like AmSECT?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to fully answer that. However, if one perfusionist goes from one hospital to the next hospital and you're performing the same surgery, is it the same steps at every hospital, or is it slightly different based on the hospital or the culture or the surgeon, or how does that necessarily work?
It is different based on the surgeon, the kind of surgery, whether it's children or adults. So it is slightly different, but I think the basic steps are same.
Okay.
Scott, you can correct me. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
In my experience, I know that standardized works. It works for us. However, if I'm going to go fly my helicopter in a different squadron, it's the exact same helicopter and we're going to fly it the exact same way. So maybe that doesn't necessarily translate to what you all do on a day-to-day basis. But if you can standardize the basics, that may be helpful. Like if each surgeon has their own technique, that is acceptable. However, everybody leads up to the surgery the same way, I would imagine. Once you're in the surgery, like everybody plays basketball slightly differently. However, you're trying to accomplish the same mission. And all of your lead up to tip off is basically the same thing. But once you get on the court, it's slightly different. So I do understand that portion, that everybody has their own techniques. But if you can standardize everything leading up to somebody taking over, that would probably help. At least in my experience, that is helpful for us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Captain Grandon, for sharing your time with us and sharing your information on both checklists, your experience, and crew resource management. Thanks to Bharat and Billy for helping to contribute to the CEU meeting today, the webinar. Rana, anything that we need to make a note of as we close out today?
Just that this webinar, as you know, was approved for 1.2 CEUs by the ABCP. So all attendees will be emailed a survey tomorrow. Please complete this survey to claim your credits and provide us any feedback on the webinar.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending. Go out and change the world.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.